Before Yuri Gagarin, there were others. 4 names surfaced in Cold War intelligence reports. A high-ranking Soviet officer was also rumored to have launched before Gagarin. Then came audio recordings, voices of lost cosmonauts calling for help from space. This is the story of the Lost Cosmonauts. On April 7, 1961, 5 days before Yuri Gagarin's launch, Soviet Union launched a heavily modified Vostok capsule. Piloting it was Vladimir Ilyushin, a decorated war hero, a top Soviet test pilot, and the son of Sergei Ilyushin, one of the most powerful figures in the Soviet aerospace program. The world never knew about the launch. It wasn't broadcast, it wasn't reported, it wasn't meant to be. This mission was top secret, a full orbital flight intended to beat the Americans. According to declassified reports, foreign intelligence intercepts, and testimonies buried for decades, Vladimir Ilyushin did it. He flew into space, and he made it back. But not the way he was supposed to. Something went wrong during re-entry. The capsule's guidance system malfunctioned. Instead of landing in Soviet territory, Ilyushin's spacecraft veered wildly off course, crash landing in the People's Republic of China. He survived the impact. But what happened next was a Cold War nightmare. He was captured by the Chinese military, held in secret, and used as leverage in a geopolitical power play between 2 communist superpowers on the verge of collapse. The Soviets panicked. They had just lost their first cosmonaut, not in space, but in the hands of a rival regime. So they did what authoritarian governments do best. They erased the mission, they erased the man, and they rewrote history. It all started on October 4, 1957. The Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik 1, the first satellite to orbit Earth. America panicked. If the Soviets could launch a satellite, they could further advance in space weaponry. The US responded by creating the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958. They soon launched their first mission, Pioneer 1. But things didn't work out as planned. The Pioneer 1 got burned upon re-entry in Earth's atmosphere. NASA's first successful mission came in 1959 when they launched Pioneer 4. But something else also happened in 1959. A strange story began to circulate through Western intelligence circles. And it didn't come from Moscow, it came from Czechoslovakia. According to a leak from a high-ranking military source, the Soviet Union had already launched several manned space flights and lost them. The report named 4 cosmonauts who had supposedly died in total secrecy: Alexei Ladovsky, Andrei Mitkov, Sergei Shiburin, Maria Gromova. No photos, no ranks, no background, just 4 names. One was said to have died in a launch pad explosion, another suffocated in orbit. Gromova, the lone woman, allegedly burned up during re-entry. The story was soon picked up by an Italian news agency. But here's the eerie part. There were no dates, no mission numbers, no official records. It was as if they never existed. But at the height of the Cold War, the idea that the Soviets were hiding dead cosmonauts wasn't just believable. It was expected. Not long after the mysterious Czechoslovakian leak, strange new signals began to surface. Not from Soviet whistleblowers, but from 2 teenage brothers living in Turin, Italy. Achille and Giovanni Judica-cordiglia weren't spies, they weren't scientists, they were amateurs, enthusiasts. Just 2 kids obsessed with radio and rockets, but what they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The brothers converted an abandoned Nazi bunker called Torre Bert into a makeshift listening station. Using scavenged military equipment and homemade antennas, they started scanning the skies, hoping to catch transmissions from American satellites. What they intercepted was something else entirely. Between 1960 and 1964, Achille and Giovanni claimed to have recorded 9 secret Soviet space missions the USSR never admitted existed. One recording featured a man's voice growing more frantic by the second, repeating that his capsule was off course. Later, sometime another signal was picked up, this time a female cosmonaut, breathing heavily, gasping for air, her voice weak and panicked, until it suddenly stopped. In one of the most chilling tapes, the brothers claimed to have captured a cosmonaut burning alive during re-entry. His final moments preserved in static and screams. Each recording was more disturbing than the last, and each raised the same question. If these weren't real, why did they sound so real? The brothers brought their evidence to the press, and soon the world was listening. Headlines spoke of secret space flights. On March 23, 1961, Bondarenko was performing a routine endurance test in a high-oxygen isolation chamber. He was a young medical officer in the first group of cosmonaut trainees, a bright, promising figure in the Soviet space program. But things went very bad for him. He accidentally dropped an alcohol-soaked cotton ball onto a hot plate. The chamber burst into flames. Due to the pure oxygen environment, the fire spread rapidly. There was no fire suppression system. Bondarenko suffered severe burns and died hours later. His death was immediately classified. The Soviets didn't want any bad press before Gagarin's historic flight. Bondarenko's name was erased from official records. His image was airbrushed out of photos. Now, let's go back to Ilyushin. His alleged spaceflight was first detailed in 1962 by British journalist Denis Ogden and later picked up by French writer Edouard Bravkin. Both claimed Ilyushin launched into space before Gagarin, but crash-landed in China and was held captive. Soviet media, of course, said no such flight ever occurred. They insisted Ilyushin was injured in a car crash, which conveniently explained his long absence from public life. But there were inconsistencies. Why did China remain silent? And why, years later, was Ilyushin never allowed to speak publicly about spaceflight? Let's look at the facts. Vladimir Ilyushin was indeed a high-ranking pilot, but there's zero hard evidence he ever trained for spaceflight. His name does not appear in any official cosmonaut rosters. The alleged launch date, April 7, 1961, is suspiciously close to Gagarin's flight, making it ripe for retroactive speculation. As for the crash in China, no Chinese records or declassified Soviet files mention a downed capsule or a captured pilot. After the USSR collapsed, extensive archives were opened. No flight logs, no mission data, no mention of a covert Vostok launch. And while Ilyushin did disappear from the public eye for a while, he later returned. Healthy and active in aviation circles, he lived until 2010. Not exactly the fate you'd expect from someone held hostage for years. The Torre Bert tapes, fact or fabrication? The judica-cordiglia brothers swore what they recorded was real, but not everyone was convinced. From the moment their tapes were made public, experts began poking holes in the story. First, the audio quality. Some of the transmissions, supposedly coming from low Earth orbit or even deep space, included background noise that simply shouldn't be there. Static and interference that matched Earth-based radio chatter, not the sterile silence of space. Then there were the voices. Linguists noticed the speech patterns were oddly theatrical, phrases that sounded less like panic and more like someone reading a script. One cosmonaut even used terminology that wasn't part of standard Soviet communication protocols. And perhaps most damning of all, the frequencies. The brothers claimed to have intercepted highly classified Soviet transmissions using off-the-shelf equipment and improvised antennas. But former NASA engineers and radio experts say that's extremely unlikely. The Soviet Union used encrypted directional frequencies that would have been nearly impossible for a pair of teenagers to pick up without access to military-grade gear and exact telemetry data. In 2008, space historian and forensic audio analyst Sven Gran conducted an in-depth review of the Torre Bert recordings. His conclusion? The tapes were not authentic. The Czechoslovakian leak. The names don't appear in any Soviet or post-Soviet records. No documents, no training logs, no families, just likely invented names. The so-called Czechoslovak military informant was never identified or verified. Most likely it was Cold War rumor or disinformation. Even Soviet defectors never confirmed the story. So, were 4 cosmonauts lost before Gagarin? Almost certainly not. They probably never existed. While many lost cosmonauts are fictional, one name stands out, Valentin Bondarenko. It wasn't until 1986, 25 years later, that the truth came out. His story, once hidden, became a symbol of how far the USSR was willing to go to control their narrative. When this cover-up was revealed, it reignited interest in the Lost Cosmonauts theory. After all, if they could hide Bondarenko's death, what else could they be hiding? So, did the Soviet Union lose cosmonauts in space? We may never know for sure. The USSR was notorious for secrecy. Failures were buried, successes were paraded,